Okay, and then finally we have the reactions here last. This is just kind of a fun feature that you guys can play with if you like. Send a thumbs up if you're feeling it. Okay, awesome. And then finally, of course, there's leave meeting. Don't do that yet. But once you have to go, that's how you can exit. Okay, one thing I really want to point out to you guys specifically is let's go back to the mute button. And you see next to the mute button, there's like a little upward arrow. There's sort of a drop up menu. And there are a lot of options here around your sound and how to connect your sound. The one I think that's really important that I want to point out to you is switch to phone audio. So you guys can go ahead and click that and see what happens. What should happen is a white box will pop up and it'll give you a dial-in number, a meeting ID, and a participant ID and password for you to join on your phone. So this is a really important feature for you to be able to adjust if you're having any connectivity issues, difficulty being heard, anything like that. You can always choose to dial in via phone to join the Zoom webinar and connect it directly this way. So I really want to point that feature out for you in case you're having trouble with connections at any point. Okay, similarly, let's look at the video again and that side menu here. I want to point out to you guys this fun feature, choose virtual background. So if you click on that, you'll see that a couple of options come up. This can be fun to play with in terms of backgrounds to put behind yourself so that you know, the room that you're in can't necessarily be seen. I'll put one in right now just to play with. And I just want to flag that for you guys because, you know, if you are in a situation where you're just not comfortable with, you know, your surroundings or showing everybody your home, or, you know, maybe there's a lot of people passing in and out, that's always an option for you to put a virtual background up to make it feel a little bit more comfortable.
Leah, I also wanted to flag a question in the chat really quick to just repeat about the switching to phone and how to do that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you for the question. So if you go to the mute where your mute icon is, and then slightly to the right, there's like, you know, a triangle that indicates a drop-down menu. So if you click that triangle, you should see this sort of long menu of different audio options that you have. You can change to different speakers or headsets or test your speakers and your microphone, all of that. And the one you want is switch to phone audio. And once you click that, this white box should pop up that shows you a dial-in number and all the information you'll need in order to connect via audio. Did you find that, Risa?
No, but I don't want to hold everyone up. I'm on an iPad. Maybe that has something to do with it.
Okay, yeah, likely so. I think that after in your breakout groups in Pennsylvania, after you guys finish going over the meeting content, maybe Katie can support you in trying to track that feature down.
Thank you. And thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Okay, awesome. So I wanted to just do a quick troubleshoot, some common issues that come up on Zoom, you know, that could happen the day of your meeting. If they do happen, you guys will know how to address them. Actually, I guess we can go back to the slideshow now. I think I can do that, Sarah. Why don't I do that? Okay. Are you all seeing my screen right now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Okay, so some common issues on a Zoom call that you guys might interact is interference or background noise. You heard some of that a little bit on the start of the call. Usually the best way to solve this immediately is to just mute. So I'm getting some background noise right now. So if you are getting background noise and you're hearing that on the call, go ahead and mute your phone immediately. And that should at least solve the problem in the interim. Usually the reason you're getting background noise is either there's one person who doesn't realize that there's like a lot of noise around them happening, or there's a lot of people who are not muted and there's sort of some reverberation echoing. So in either of those cases, if everybody mutes their phone, then that likely should be resolved. Another thing that you can do, and similar to the next item, which is if you're having trouble hearing or being heard, one thing you can do is use a headset or headphones to connect to your iPad or to your computer, and that should really help with the clarity of sound in terms of people hearing you and you being able to hear as well. So that can make a big difference. Similarly, make sure you're in a quiet place. Sometimes that can't be avoided, like if you have noisy cats, for example, but make sure when you're doing the webinar that you have a quiet place around you and you're aware of that. And that can really help with background noise and hearing issues. Okay, so if you have a bad connection, I think I saw something about a bad connection earlier in chat. Sometimes the first thing I would do with a bad connection is, if you're experiencing one now, then you know that you might need to do this for your in-district meeting, right? So one thing you can do is connect directly to your router. Your router has an Ethernet cord that flows right into it if you are using wireless. If you go ahead and take that and insert it directly into your computer, you should be able to get a stronger connection and more steady than using your wireless. So if you are experiencing a bad connection, that might be worth giving that a try to see if that improves it. Another thing you can do is, if that's really not resolving it, you can dial in by phone, as we went over earlier. Remember going down to the sidebar with mute and choosing to join by phone. If you are having a bad connection, then that can be a good way to manage it. Another thing you can try is turning off your video. Sometimes your computer may not be able to handle streaming video and sound at the same time. If that's the case, turn off your video and see if that helps at all. All right, so I think that's some things you can apply if you have a bad connection. If you have any trouble getting onto the call, a couple things you can do. Again, dial in by phone. When you guys received the invite for your Zoom meeting, you received a link and then you also received the phone information and phone number. So even if you can't get on the call through the link, you'll have that phone information and you can go ahead and call in, and at least you can hear the meeting and be there as it's starting. And then I would just keep trying to join online as you're listening in via phone, and hopefully you can get through. And then the second thing, I would just let your team leader know. If you're having any trouble joining the call or getting on, shoot an email to your team leader for your meetings and let them know that you're having trouble being there. But hopefully you should be able to at least call into the meeting. Okay, and then situational awareness. Just be aware of your surroundings. So, Tara will talk about this in a little bit, but obviously you're on video, you will be seen by the member. If there are people behind you, they will also be seen. So make sure, your family know that. Sometimes it's, unavoidable, especially in these situations where we're all working from home, to sort of see family members walk by or have animals pass through or anything like that. But whatever you can do to avoid that, I think just being aware is helpful. Yeah, and again, if you're worried about that, if you're worried about what's going on behind you or in your space, feel free to use those virtual backgrounds that we talked about a little bit earlier. Okay, that is it in terms of our quick Zoom overview. I hope that was helpful. I hope some folks learned something new. I hope the folks who are brand new to Zoom are feeling a little bit better about it. Do you guys have any questions? So are you seeing any questions come up in chat?
Nope.
Okay, great. Awesome. Okay, and if you're having any specific issues, feel free to address that with your team members later on. Okay, so now we'll go into the Lobbying 101 section of our meeting. So this is the meat and potatoes. We'll talk a little bit about how to lobby and what to do. So I'll turn it over to Tara, our Deputy Director, to go over that with us. Take it away, Tara.
Great. Thank you, Leah. All right. Well, thank you all for joining. I'm going to talk about Lobbying 101, basic tips for how we can advocate for our issues, which obviously we'll be talking about the Endangered Species Act, protecting threatened and endangered species and their habitats during these meetings. So first off, I just want to back up and say, you know, what does lobbying mean? Lobbying is really referring to asking an elected official or a key decision maker to vote a certain way or take a specific stand on a piece of legislation, a rule, an issue, a policy. Corey will be talking about what those specific asks are. But I want to say really one of the most persuasive forms of lobbying is face-to-face. And unfortunately, during these days of COVID-19, we're unable to do that. Generally, during the August recess, when Congress is home in their districts, we would encourage their constituents to go meet them where they're at in their in-district offices. So this is you know, strange times that we're dealing with. So I know you'll be meeting with your members of Congress and or their staff via Zoom, which thank you to Leah to giving us a great training on how Zoom works and the different features that you can use. The other way I think some of you will be meeting with your elected officials is through conference call. So unfortunately, they won't be able to see you, but they will be able to hear you. And we'll get into more of what you'll be talking about in a few minutes, and you'll have time to practice in your breakout group. So I wanted to give you some tips, starting out with, I'll cover what you should do before your meeting with your elected official, why it's important that you go and or show up on that Zoom meeting or the conference call. How do you prepare for that meeting? Just finalizing some pre-meeting details, what the anatomy of a successful meeting looks like, the different steps in the meeting that you want to make sure you're covering. And then finally, what do you do after the meeting is over? So let's just start with before the meeting. And some of the things that we ask folks to do, and I know all of you were sent talking points on the different issues that we'll be covering in the meeting. And then after this training tonight, we'll send you a link with a lot more material, fact sheets and sign-on letters and that sort of thing that you can review. So just good to get familiar with the issues that we're talking about. But I do want to stress here that it's really critical that you don't feel like you need to be an expert on these issues. You'll have one of our fantastic superstar ESC organizers that'll be joining you in the meeting and facilitating the meeting. So if there are, you know, tough questions and that sort of thing, hopefully they can answer, or they will certainly get back to the staff person or the legislator with the information that they requested. So don't want to overwhelm you. The really important thing and the reason why you were invited to join these meetings with elected officials is because you're a constituent. You're, you know, the elected official, the member of Congress, the senator is your senator and should be representing you and your interests in Congress. So it's really important that they hear from you. You know, you may have a specific interest. You know, a lot of times individuals don't even know who their legislators are or even call their members of Congress. So you taking the time to join a conference call or Zoom meeting or go to an in-person meeting with a member of Congress is something that's going to stick in their mind, what it is that you talked about. So it's really important that you're going, and I can't stress enough how appreciative we are that you feel strongly enough about endangered species issues to join this meeting. So thank you for that. want to talk about some of the ways you can prepare for the meeting. Obviously, as I mentioned, you'll have a lot of the fact sheets and materials and that sort of thing. But another issue that you also may want to do is to consider doing a little background homework on the member of Congress that you'll be visiting. Just making sure that you, what this member of Congress, what their position is on the issue. Does that elected official generally support or oppose your issue? Do you know what their voting record is on the issue? Sometimes you can look, there's some good resources and I can share some of that with you, but Project Vote Smart is one source that you can look at to look at voting records. You may want to find out if the person that you're meeting with is a sponsor of the legislation. The Paul and Finn Act is one of the bills that we'll be talking about. We have 122 House members that have already signed on to co-sponsor that bill, so you may want to find out if your member is a co-sponsor. There's, I think it's up to about 19 senators that are sponsored on the Senate side. We're working this more on the House side right now, but certainly want to see if your member is a sponsor or co-sponsor of that bill. And you can look that up on the Library of Congress's website. And then just other background information, you can look at the Member of Congress's website and see the issues that they find interesting, what committees they serve on, that sort of thing. So doing a little background homework on your Member of Congress is an important thing to do as well. Now I want to talk about a little bit about the pre-meeting details, and this is some of what you'll be discussing when you go into the breakout room with the ESC organizer. And these are some of the things you want to figure out, like who's going to be facilitating the meeting on your team. So you'll have a team. I think there's anywhere from 2 to 15 people that will be joining you in this meeting with your Member of Congress. So figuring out who's gonna facilitate the meeting, who's going to take the lead, who's going to be available to answer specific questions, which participant can take notes of the meeting, and who's going to write the follow-up and/or thank you letter after the meeting's over. So some of the things you definitely want to make sure you're clear about is what your message is, the resources you want to leave behind or send after the meeting, and what your ultimate ask is. So those are just some pre-meeting details that you want to think about and prepare in advance of the meeting. All right, now I want to talk about what an anatomy of a successful meeting is. I have a 10-step kind of tools to go through. So Sarah, oh, you got it already. Thank you, Sarah. All right, so the first step here is to arrive early, and that means joining into your, clicking your join the Zoom meeting or calling into the conference line at least 5 to 10 minutes, I would say, in advance of when the meeting is supposed to begin. You just want to make sure that you're ready, you're prepared, you have your notebook, you have your points in front of you, that sort of thing. So arriving early is critical. Also, members and their staff are incredibly busy. So they may only have 10, 15 minutes they can give you. So you want to make sure that you arrive and you're prompt. So that's step number one. Step number two is making a connection, asking staffers where they're from in your state, getting to know them a little bit but also letting them know a little bit more about you. If you're lobbying as an individual, you want to introduce yourself as a constituent, mention any family, social, or business ties that you might have with a legislator, and any identifier roles. For example, I'm a mom from Litchfield, and I'm also, my husband's a small business owner, so these issues are really important to us because XYZ. So just introducing yourself and making that connection early on is important. The next one is just starting with a supportive statement, and this goes back to how you're preparing for the meeting and just knowing where the legislator stands on your issue. So if your legislator recently voted in favor of a related issue that you care about, mention that. If they signed on as a co-sponsor already of the PAW and Fin Act, thank them for that. If they signed an important letter, we have a couple of letters that we're going to share with you in terms of funding the Endangered Species Act. Thank them for that. So those are great ways to kind of start the meeting off on a good footing. The next step is really stating clearly and concisely the issues that you want to discuss. Let them know early on what your position is, what the action is that you want your elected official to take, and using understandable terms and avoiding acronyms is also important. I know we, especially us, we generally fall back on that a lot. So making sure you're, these might be staff members that really aren't as familiar with the issue as you are. So avoiding those acronyms. And then the next step is really about sharing your personal story or giving some concrete examples that highlight your experience with the issue and why you care about it. Some of these stories are really, I would say, probably the meat of the meetings. It's the thing that your member of Congress is going to remember most about the meeting. They're going to be like, oh yeah, I remember Tara. She was the one that, talked about, seeing a whale when she went, out on a whale watch and how that inspired her to do this work. Or, those kind of things, examples about you, a story that you have to tell about your connection to endangered species. Those are really what's going to stick more than any facts or figures or any of those things that others, that professional lobbyists would normally go in and talk about with a member of Congress. Okay, and then moving on, I would say that you mention any other organizations or influential people, government officials or lawmakers that also may support your position. If you're aware of that, be good to mention it. And then the next thing I want to stress is really being a good listener. You'll talk for the first few minutes with your group, but you also want to make sure you give your member of Congress or their staff person time to talk about their concerns, to ask you any questions they might have, to get more detail about the issue. So make sure that you're a good listener and you're giving the legislator or the staff person time to respond. You don't want to just talk 100% of the time. Good rule of thumb is usually 50-50. You want to have all the participants talk about 50% of the time and let the member of Congress and their staff talk the remaining time. Another thing I want to point out is answering questions to the best of your ability. If you don't know the answer, and I think I stated this earlier, you'll have one of the ESC organizers with you that more than likely will be able to answer any questions that the legislator may have. But if they're not, it's most important just to be honest. Oh, and I'm not really sure about that, but let me get back to you. And that's a great opportunity to use that information as a follow-up to your meeting, and make sure you do get that information to the member of Congress. Try to track down the answers to anything they asked you didn't know the answer to, and follow up with them. Get back to them about that. Again, I want to say, explicitly making your ask. Don't forget to do that again. Generally, we do that a few times throughout the meeting. You want to do it up front, as I mentioned earlier, and then you want to bring it back. So sometimes your member or the staff person might go off on a little bit of a tangent. You want to bring them back and make your ask again. that's an important thing. And you want to try to be as explicit as possible, I would say, when you make that ask. Can we count on, Senator Tester to co-sponsor the Part and Fin Act? So really ask very specifically, very concretely, yes or no, can we count on your support? Will you co-sponsor that bill? Will you sign on to that letter? So, you want to have a plan to turn a yes into a champion or an undecided into a yes, and to learn from the objections of a no. Those are a couple of things. A yes is an opportunity to turn them into a real champion of the Endangered Species Act. Somebody that's a maybe, you can find out what the concerns are. If they have other constituents that are giving them different information, or maybe they're confused about an issue, you might be able to get them some good concrete examples of why this would be important to them, to their constituents, to their state, and get them that information. And then if there are no, it's also a good opportunity to learn from them. Why are they saying no? Because it's an opportunity to be able to respond to your opposition and to learn who your opposition is on the issue. We won't be leaving legislators with materials. Usually when we go into the meetings, we have a packet of materials we leave behind. So that's also another way to present that material to them in a follow-up email that you'll figure out who's going to make that follow-up email, who's going to send that, and make sure that you send them any fact sheets or other material that they requested. And most importantly is to thank the legislator, regardless of what their position is. It's important to thank them for taking the time to meet with you. You want to be as respectful as possible, even if they, as I said, even if they didn't agree with your position. So thanking them. So those are the pretty much the run through. And I know I went through that pretty quickly, and we'll give you some material that you can take home, some lobby day preparation that has a lot of these points that I made. But that is kind of the run through of how to have a successful meeting. And then I would say finally is just following up with that legislator again, just after the meeting. What you do is somebody that you've designated in the breakout session. I think after this, you'll designate one person to take notes. You'll figure out who's going to do the follow-up with the legislator. It may be the ESC organizer. It might be somebody else. Just thanking them for their meeting, and again, any materials or questions they ask, make sure you cover that in that thank you email. So that's all I have. So thank you very much. And again, I want to see if anyone has any questions for me about the basics of lobbying, or what to anticipate in your meeting. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thanks, Tara. Yes, we welcome any questions. If you have a question, feel free to take yourself off mute, any question at all, or feel free to write it in the chat box as well.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, please, go ahead. Oh, could you introduce yourself as well?
So when I've been on meetings with senators in the past, or congressmen, I have felt like they are way too friendly and letting us sort of like pretending that they're on our side, and when they often are not. That's not really true. But they're just tactful and diplomatic, and I'm just wondering what we should do if we find that we're getting sort of a fake nice reaction from the staffers.
That's a great
That's
question.
a great point, Daniel. You want me to take that, Leah? I think you'll get that from most members of Congress. They're going to be very friendly to you. Obviously, you're a constituent, so they want to be friendly and nice. I think making the ask and being as specific as possible, I think is key. So kind of nailing them down to a yes or no. Can we count on you to support the Pawn Fin Act? Can we count on you to join as a co-sponsor? And really, and be as explicit as possible on that. You know, it's a yes or no. I think that's one of the most important things. I don't know, Corey, if you have anything else you want to add?
I mean, the thing is that every single I'm not a professional. I don't do this a lot. I've done it maybe about 10, 15 times. And every single time the staffers have been completely, incredibly non-committal, no matter how specific the ask is. So I've never gotten a yes or no in any of my meetings with staffers.
You just kind of have to anticipate that. That's why they're good at their job. It's frustrating. It's kind of like why we have to build a relationship. You go in with this and then you just keep asking and follow up with emails. It's just as frustrating for professional lobbyists because that's just what they're really good at, is talking without saying anything.
Yeah. So thank you very much for the comprehensive, this is what we want to happen. I'm just feeling like that's not quite realistic based on my experience.
Yeah, I think that can definitely be frustrating not to get that committal answer, and maybe sometimes it feels like, you know, what difference have I made if I haven't sort of gotten that answer from them? But the most important thing is that you guys are showing up and that they're hearing from you. You know, even if you're not getting a committed answer from them, they will let their boss know that they have heard from this number of constituents who are concerned about these issues. And so, you know, you putting your voice in there makes a difference. It gets heard, it gets moved up. And, you know, unfortunately, like in politics, it seems like things take a long time and nobody really says anything until like months down the line. So I hear your frustration and you're making a difference.
I think another thing, Daniel, I think, and folks, I think is you can ask them, like, are they hearing from other constituents on this issue? Anyone else coming and talking to them about this issue? So you can learn a little bit more if they're hearing from the opposition. That might give you a heads up on what else they're hearing on this issue, and maybe what some of those obstacles may be to convincing them to support your issue.
Great. Are there any other questions on how to lobby?
I have a quick question. Hi, everybody. It's Haley. Tara, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about, you mentioned having the staff or member talk about 50% of the time. And we've mentioned some questions like, you know, what concern do you have about X bill, or what you just said about like, what are you hearing from other constituents on this issue? And I'm wondering, like Leah and you both mentioned relationship building. I was wondering if you could give some examples of some other relationship building questions that we can ask our members while we're in our meetings with them. Like,
Sure.
I have an idea. Can you hear me?
Yep. Okay, Corey.
One of the things that makes this meeting such a perfect timing opportunity is because we're making the connection between biodiversity loss and the pandemic, which was, you know, with the trade and wildlife trafficking, and that's going to come up in the asks. But ask them how they're experiencing this pandemic. I feel like this is a whole new world of people have different experiences, and some people want to talk a lot about it, and some people won't. But and you know, keep tying it back to biodiversity loss. I just think that's a good opportunity for connecting and making that connection, deeper connection.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. I know we've also asked like, what's your favorite state park or national park? But I love that question, Corey, of bringing it back to biodiversity in the pandemic. And awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, again, Haley, what you just mentioned too, like, what are their, you know, have they ever seen an endangered species in the state? Like, what are their favorite endangered species, or where are their favorite places to go hiking or, you know, fishing or whatever? They may have some, you know, experience in the outdoors, and it's good to get them talking a little bit, because you'll learn more about them as well, and sometimes that's useful later on. Anyone else have questions?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Sure, go ahead.
I'm curious what else you might have to say about access to, the way I understand it is research that you have compiled on records of legislators.
There's a couple of different sites. Votesmart.org gives you some information. That was one site I mentioned. Another one is the League of Conservation Voters. They do an annual scorecard on on members of Congress every year. So that's a good place to look for general overview of what their position is on environmental issues in general. One of our other member groups, Defenders of Wildlife, also has a scorecard. And so that's an area you could look at what the position, members of Congress's position has been on wildlife issues more specifically. So I would suggest checking out some of those sites, as well as the member of Congress's site too. I think on their site, they always tell you what committees they belong to, some concerns. You can look back at press releases or other things that they put out, so you can learn a little bit about what their interests and concerns are. So those are some areas to do some background research. If there's a specific bill that you're going to talk to them about, the Library of Congress, which is just congress.gov, you put in the bill number, or you can put a bill sponsor in the search engine, and it'll show up the bill, and you can look at who those co-sponsors are on that specific piece of legislation. So those are all places that you can look to learn a little bit about your member of Congress. And I suspect for this meeting, I think the ESC organizer will have some of that information that they can share with you about who it is you're going to visit and what their position is, and if they've co-sponsored. So I think they'll have some information to share with you in the breakout sessions as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all for your questions, much appreciated. We've got a little bit more time left for the rest of the session, so I'm going to go ahead and move us along to the next piece of our agenda, which is where we talk about the specific asks and opportunities around legislation to make a difference for wildlife right now. So I'll let Corey take it from here.
Whoops. Okay, you guys can hear me, right? Okay, so what are the specific asks to your members of Congress or their staff? We're in the middle of a biodiversity crisis, as we all know. This pandemic is evidence of this as well. So our first key ask is to defend the Endangered Species Act. And as Tara has referenced, our big ask with that is to support the Protect America's Wildlife and Fish in Need of Conservation Act, affectionately known as the PON-FIN Act. And this bill right now, if you remember, Trump finalized some regulations last year that are terrible for the ESA. They involve things like having a cost-benefit analysis to determine if you should list a species, which right now is based on science. Lost a lot of protections for threatened species. We have a fact sheet on it, so I don't feel like you have to know what I'm saying specifically. The main thing is ask the member if they have co-sponsored it or will they co-sponsor the bill. As of now, the House, as Tara said, has 122 co-sponsors, which is awesome. That shows a lot of support. The Senate is just the Senate. We only have 20, but we're working it harder in the House. If your member has already co-sponsored, thank them profusely. That's awesome. And then your organizer will know if your member is signed on or not. If you feel like looking, that's great. The second thing is, that's the Defend the Endangered Species Act, is increased funding for the Endangered Species Act. If you recall, for 2020, we put in a request for increasing funding. ESA funding had been flat for almost 10 years, and we got almost nothing last year. A lot of other environmental programs did really well, but not ESA. So this year, the House and the Senate submitted to your colleagues with our recommended numbers from the conservation community And they are basically asking for a $59 million increase above 2020 levels for 2021. There's the letters, the House letter has 176 members signed on, and it's bipartisan, which is awesome. So that's saying that Congress sees the value of a well-funded Endangered Species Act. So y'all will have this letter to take a look at it. It has the numbers. Again, your organizer will know more of the details. So the House letter was awesome. The Senate letter only had Democrats, but it had 21. It's also a great letter. So the letters are closed, but you can provide them to the staffer. If your member is on it, thank them profusely. If they are not on it, ask them to support these levels as we go through the appropriations process. The appropriations process is always very long and very dramatic, and sometimes there's a big government shutdown. But this year, who knows what's going to happen, because we have a pandemic and it's an election year. So I anticipate it being more insane than usual. But that's the big ask, is support increased funding for the Endangered Species Act. We have been flat for a decade. Wildlife needs it more than ever before, and there's support in the Senate and the House. The third ask is kind of put into a bucket that I call Save Wildlife Locally and Across the Globe. And this is because we anticipate legislation that's going to address the wildlife trafficking and trade markets, because that's where the coronavirus has come from. I know there's debates about the lab. Viruses still come from jumping from species to humans, zoonotic diseases. So, and there's been a lot of more of them before this one. This is just the worst one ever. And the coolest thing is that a letter led by Cory Booker and Lindsey Graham, bipartisan, went to the World Health Organization saying we want to shut down live wildlife markets and ban on all international trade of live wildlife that is not intended for conservation use, which is pretty amazing. I mean, this letter is incredibly strong. And it has 64 members, House and Senate signed on, Republicans and Democrats. So when we don't have a bill yet, but if this bill gets formed, and we anticipate seeing it very soon, we're gonna ask the member to support it. And in this bucket also goes that we're anticipating a stimulus package. Like right now, House and Senate has been passing, I call them relief packages, because basically it's trying to keep the country from going under. But eventually they're going to pass a stimulus package, which is going to infuse money into the economy to create jobs and get us back on track. There's a letter that the community, the environmental community put out, 82 organizations signed on, saying what 1% of the stimulus package should go to biodiversity, endangered species protection, wildlife, jobs in the wildlife world. So that's kind of across the board, shot across the bow towards the fact that wildlife loss of biodiversity was the cause of the pandemic. So we should be putting in money to prevent the next pandemic by protecting wildlife biodiversity in the US via the ESA and internationally. And in that package, we could also end up having things like pond fin can get swallowed up in the stimulus, wildlife corridors could get swallowed up. So what you're just telling them is just be prepared for a lot of legislation to be moving soon that would prevent a future pandemic by protecting biodiversity, and you'll make sure that they know when it's happening and to support it. And we're just got these background materials for you so you kind of know what's going on. And I know that the Senate and House funding letters, the pandemic fact sheets, and the pond fin fact sheet, you should get all those right after this call, so you'll have that information. And that was a lot, so I'm gonna just stop there and see if anyone has any questions.
Thank you, Cory. That was a lot of information, but all really helpful.
Oh, and wait, can I add one more thing? We can also say if they get it and they're responding to you like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening, blah, blah, blah. Ask them if their member would be willing to write an editorial or an op-ed or a letter to the editor to help make this connection in the press and for their local constituents. Especially if you've got someone who signed on to all of this and they're really excited about addressing these problems. That's another specific ask that you can ask them to do.
Thank you, Cory. I just wanted to highlight something that Cory has been speaking to and that I mentioned earlier as well, which is this connection between COVID-19, the coronavirus, and what's going on with wildlife in terms of wildlife trafficking, right? So most people may know this, but just to be sure, the coronavirus began, it's believed, in a wildlife market in Wuhan, China, and was able to be transmitted from wildlife, from one species, people believe a bat, to perhaps another species, perhaps a pangolin, and then to humans. So it's really the trafficking of wildlife and the trade and the way we treat biodiversity and wildlife and consume it that creates situations where diseases such as the coronavirus that originate in animals are able to jump from animals to humans. So while this is an incredibly serious situation and pandemic we're in, it's also an opportunity for us to really highlight the importance of treating wildlife properly, of not trafficking in wildlife, of not consuming wildlife, of eliminating wildlife markets. And so that's that sort of last ask that Corey is speaking to. There are opportunities to move that forward within Congress now that we're really excited for you guys to support. Okay, are there any other questions on any of the asks? I know it was a lot, so please don't be shy.
I have a question. I'm sorry, more questions. One of the things that I've noticed is that the administration will make a ruling about the Endangered Species Act, like we're going to delist this or we delist that. And I don't have any specifics. I just get filed as, oh, yet another outrage. And then there's private groups like the Center for Biological Diversity or whatever that will sue the federal government to enforce the Endangered Species Act. And then then things get dragged out at the speed of court cases and things like that. Is there a role for the legislative branch to get involved in that conflict between the courts and the executive branch? And is that something that we can ask our representative?
Who wants to speak to that?
Oh, I could just say, I think for sure that the Paw and Fin Act is exactly what you're asking. It's these regulations came out of the Trump administration to roll back a bunch of Endangered Species Act protections, basically to weaken the Endangered Species Act. And the Paw and Fin Act basically reverses that. So that's one way that we're using the legislative process to roll back or to reverse those rollbacks of the Endangered Species Act. In terms of a legislative process to stop the court cases, I don't know that is something we'd want to advocate for. I mean, I think a lot of the court cases that are brought on Endangered Species Act issues are from conservation groups, I should say, are because the Fish and Wildlife Service has failed to meet a deadline around, coming up with recovery goals or listing a species after it's been petitioned to be listed under the Endangered Species Act, that sort of thing. So I don't think we want to limit the ability to do that. To a legislative process.
That wasn't really what I was asking. It wasn't to limit it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It was to have either the delegation sort of put in, let's just say the delegation can put in a letter to the court, to a case in progress supporting a particular position, or it can put restrictions on the federal agency to prevent the delisting that would cause it to go to court, or things like that, or prevent the funding of the agency to sort of defend against those court cases. Like I'm not sure exactly what the actual role would be, but it would be to strengthen those lawsuits, not to prevent them.
Yeah, they're always complicated, and you always, and traditionally, we want the scientists and the science at the Fish and Wildlife Service to make the decisions. So the litigation is usually based on arbitrary and capricious, or they didn't have comment periods, or they didn't say why they came up with the conclusion. So it's not like the government is always good, and it's not like the courts are always the best place to go, especially now as I become more conservative. But the one thing we definitely don't like is when Congress gets involved with listing or delisting, because then it's always political. So what you're struggling with is what we all struggle with. Where's the best avenue and what's the best place to go to make sure that wildlife is protected? And often, sometimes you can get involved with the litigation, like you're saying, write letters, and sometimes it's better if you don't. Every situation is a little bit different.
Right.
Yeah, and I would say also, let me just add also that we do have for the case around the ESA regs, the rollback of the Endangered Species Act. We did get letters. So we got letters from House members, Senate members, all opposing those regs. And there were quite a few. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there were quite a few members that signed on to those letters opposing those rollbacks. There were also 20 plus attorney generals that wrote letters in opposition to the rollbacks. And then we also worked with governors in many states, urging governors' offices to chime in, or governors to write letters in opposition. So we have used those kind of tactics in the past. Obviously, I think it's a pretty powerful case when governors and attorney generals are writing in opposition as well as members of Congress.
I just wanted to add to Corey's point around, getting Congress involved. A lot of the tactics that you mentioned that potentially could we pursue have been used against us. There are riders in legislation that stop the consideration of listing species or do not allow appropriations for the conservation of certain species. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. If we take those tactics, we allow their use, and when we don't control Congress, they can be used against us to the detriment of endangered species. So just wanted to add that. Are there other questions on the talking points or legislation or anything? It's a great conversation.
In terms of protecting endangered species, a large issue is habitat protection. And I don't have a feeling for your group and your intentions to address it from that angle. To what extent that's important. I know in the West, any attempt to try and prevent the development of private land in order to protect habitat is extremely contentious.
You cut out a little bit there, Howard. Did you catch that, Corey, the thread of that question?
I think that Howard was just saying that habitat is extremely important, and habitat loss is one of the main reasons we're losing biodiversity and wildlife, and that it's very contentious out west to protect land and I know there's a lot of public lands and there's issues with that as well, but I will say that the Wildlife Corridors Bill, there is I can never remember what Senator Udall's 30 bill is. So the coalition and we totally support these efforts to protect public lands. We just didn't include them in this because we had a lot of asks right now. So it's not as though, yes, I mean, the top 5 reasons we're in this crisis is land loss, invasive species, wildlife trade and trafficking, climate change, and pollution. So that's a lot to have to deal with. But were you talking about one specific animal? And I missed that if you were.
Well, in Montana, grizzly bears, they kind of go wherever they want to. And as the more private property that gets developed in grizzly bear habitat, the more interactions there are with grizzly bears. And when there's an interaction between a human and a grizzly bear that's threatening, the grizzly bear loses. He gets killed. So it's not an issue that's going to be for the grizzly bear that's going to be resolved in a good way unless we control the development of private land that in and around in the ecosystems of the primary habitat national park and national park.
Absolutely, and I think as Corey mentioned, working on habitat connectivity, the wildlife corridors is certainly something that the Endangered Species Coalition has been working on for some time now. There's a bill on the national level, and I know there's some work in some of the states as well to get specific corridors protected, to do study bills on corridors. So that's absolutely something we support.
Thank you all for your questions. This has been such an interesting discussion. I do want to make sure that we have time for you guys to get into your breakout groups, and Howard, Derek, who's in charge of your breakout group, works a lot on Grizzly. I'm sure you guys have a lot that you could talk about. So Sarah is going to do a quick poll just to see how everybody's feeling after this lobby training, in terms of your confidence, in terms of going into the office and speaking. So Sarah, could you do that poll quickly for us?
It should be up if people can see it.
Thanks, Sarah. I see that. So are you guys feeling fully prepared, ready to go in and lobby? Are you still kind of in the middle of there? You know, like you've learned a lot today, but maybe you need to do like a little more research or prep to feel 100% confident. Or are you still feeling like you need more preparation and instruction on how to have these meetings? How are you feeling?
And then do you want me to share the results? Great. Okay, almost everyone has voted, so I'm going to share the results now.
Awesome. Okay, so 58% of us, a good portion of the majority, feel ready, prepared to lobby. That is awesome. 38%, which is also a good group, know a lot more right now, but still need some preparation, which is fine because we are about to head into our breakout groups to talk a little bit more. Any questions you have or any further preparation you need, feel free to talk about that with your organizer, who can sort of address that explicitly with you. And then 4% of us are not feeling confident and prepared at all. I'm sorry about that. And if your questions are not answered with your breakout groups, please feel free to shoot me an email or your team lead an email. My email is up here if you have general concerns about ESC, about how to lobby that don't get answered today. Feel free to reach out to me. Again, you guys are about to head into your breakout groups to talk a little bit more with your leads, who can really walk you through like what your specific meeting is going to look like. And then highlighting this website for you guys, if you want to copy and paste this or put that in really, put that into your browser. I love that it's just /stuff. That's pretty easy to pretty easy to remember. But on that site, we have a bunch of fact sheets about all of the topics that Corey went over today. We have the talking points, we have how to lobby information, everything you guys need. So if you want to dive in a little bit more deeply into Pond Fin and what it's about, or the connection between wildlife trafficking and COVID and pandemics, there are fact sheets and information there for you to look over. No need to kind of be an expert on those things, but it's there for you if you're interested. All right, well, thank you guys so much for joining us. At this point, we are going to go ahead and move into our breakout groups where you guys will get to meet other activists in your region, which is exciting, and get to know or work more with your organizers who are going to be leading the meeting. So Sarah's going to send us into breakout groups.
Great. I'm going to send you into a group with everyone from your state or states. I would like to remind all the ESC organizers, if someone ends up in the wrong room, just send me a direct message with their name and the state they're supposed to be in, and I can fix that really quick. But I'm going to open the room, so you should get invitations right now. And if you just click yes, you'll head on to the right state.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Hope to see you again soon, and have a great rest of your training. And of course, let us know if you're having any trouble getting into those rooms or you're not seeing that invite.
Leah, could you stop screen sharing for a second?
Sure.
Just so I can
Hey.
see what's going
Hey
on.
guys, I'm gonna go. Is that all right? Did you need me for anything else?
Nope, go for it.
Thank you. Good night.
Right.
Okay,
Great.
Katie, why are you in this room? Did I put you in this room?
Did you join your room already, Katie?
I can't hear. Oh, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Maybe she hadn't joined her room. She's kind of frozen.
Katie? Huh. This is bizarre.
She might not have clicked the like join yet, and now maybe she's frozen because she clicked it. I guess you could jump to her Pennsylvania room and check.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in really. Oh, she's there. Okay, I
Yeah.
can see that she made it.
Okay, great, great. Okay, should I join the host group then now?
Yeah, let's join that group really quickly. Hello. Tara? Can you hear us?
Sarah, we can't hear you. Are you there?
Sorry, I was on mute.
Oh,
I thought
okay, good.
I forgot I ended the meeting on my screen and I didn't hang up my phone. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, okay, cool. So you feel good about everything, Tara? You're
Yeah, I think it went really well. How about you guys? And there was a good turnout, I thought.
great turnout.
Yeah.
Well, too. I wish I'd remembered to tell people about view screen, but besides that, I thought it was okay.
Yeah, no, I thought it went really well.
Great. Yeah.
And yeah.
I love all
right.
the questions.
Well,
Have a
yeah,
great
there was
night.
some good. Yeah, you too, you guys. All right, we'll talk to you later.
Great.
Sorry. Bye,
Bye.
Tara.
Bye.
Oh, wait, stop.
I'm still here. I'm not
Okay.
leaving.
Okay.
Oh.
I
was
think
like,
Tara,
wait a
you can
minute.
go.
I think, Tara, yeah, you can leave. One of us has to stay, or this
Yeah.
is gonna.
Close. I'll stay, and I'll just like put everything on mute and
Cool.
close the video. And
Great. Let me make you the host,
okay.
just to be sure.
Yep.
That this all works. I would hate for like all the breakout groups
my
to
God.
disappear or something.
Yeah, that would be no.
Stop
no
video
good.
chat, pin video, allow record, rename.
Ooh, could you also stop the record?
Oh yeah. Stop.
I should have thought
I
of
should-
this